Alright, so what I'm doing is streaming gameplay. Well, not streaming. I'm recording gameplay of me doing a task of Gaming Watch Gallery 4, and at the same time, I'm kind of working on my mental health, or, my psychology or philosophy with regard to things. And I'm using a book called Freedom from Your Inner Critic. Whoa. And right now I'm working on something that's like it's just about like self-esteem. And like, ways that one criticizes oneself. This isn't like your usual gameplay video because of what I'm trying to do at the same time, because I'm trying to find a balance between like work and fun, or work and enjoyment of things. And I guess right now what I'm trying to do is just kind of mixing something that's kind of boring to me, which is, well, actually really boring to me, or at least very difficult to work on, which is, working on my own character or personality or psychology or philosophy or theology, just kind of working on developing myself. At the same time where I'm doing something that's fun, and is really repetitive and pretty boring in itself too. So I'm combining two tasks that are pretty boring together, and working on those. So there's a bunch of different aspects to like inner critics. I've gotten through, like, written down stuff. I mean, they're just supposed to be like a phrase or something that describes this stuff, like in the book, but I take a lot more time writing all this down. I thought about doing this kind of thing while I'm driving. It's, I don't know, it's kind of a little bit more involved and actually kind of requires some more thinking, but I think I can manage to play video games and do this at the same time. So, according to this book, the Destroyer, that's just, okay, they give like names to these things, but really it's just describing different actions that you, or thought processes that you go through. Destroyer just means like destructive thoughts or self-destructive thinking. It says, it attacks your fundamental self-worth, is deeply shaming, and tells you you shouldn't exist. You might experience a destroyer as a crushing force that wipes out your vitality, or a pervasive negative energy that stamps out any sign of creativity, spontaneity, or desire. It might look like Darth Vader, a giant spider, a leech on the back of your neck, or an elephant crushing you underfoot. And again, this is from a book called Freedom from Your Inner Critic, a Self-Therapy Approach by Jay Hurley and Bonnie Weiss. I keep going back again and again to the same thing with regard to destructive thinking, and that's the Bible, and it's, I mean, I base most of my morality, I mean, it's the thing that's supposed to be central to all of my morality and thoughts and emotions and actions and all of my life is supposed to be centered around this thing. And I'm, my view on that is that's a very cultic approach to looking at life. Or, I guess if you're a biblical scholar, you would say that cults are taking something that should be attributed to the Bible and is actually being misappropriated by cults that are trying to do something like what the Bible does, but just doing a pale imitation of it. But I'm saying that it sounds like a cult because cults have a more negative reputation. Well, I mean, it's not really a reputation, it's like one of their defining characteristics, that they are this thing that's very bizarre and arcane, and is also tries to take over your life and force people into doing certain behaviors, and is based on deception, which is where you'd get people who defend Christianity saying that that's where the similarity stops. Cults usually are defined by having a strong central leader, who's a human, something that takes, I don't know if this is one of the defining things, but it's something that takes your money. With almost all cults, there's some kind of a sex connection involved, usually with the leader of the cult just so happening to be a man, and just so happening to make women a requirement of that kind of false religion. And I think Christianity is kind of like that in some ways. I mean, you've got in the Old Testament, at least, a patriarchal structure. And I'm not talking about Tumblr patriarchy. I'm talking about an actual thing where you've got some hairy old guy, in his 70s, in the community, who's deciding who marries who, and is buying and selling women and treating them like cattle, and also kind of controlling the lives of the young men and what it is they're going to be doing and who they're going to be marrying. Something that's really similar to Mormonism. Or I don't know if Mormonism is the thing. I think it's just called. Okay, I guess it is Mormonism. And you've got that in the Old Testament. I mean, there's one incidence, or actually two incidents, where they had polygamy, but generally speaking, in the Old Testament, polygamy was never really sanctioned. Moses, or was it Abraham? Anytime polygamy was mentioned, it was not approved. It's something that the person went out of their way to do, and was looked down upon. It was not looked at positively. And also carried with it a great deal of suffering, and bad blood and stuff that went on for thousands of years. It's just a terrible disruption of what God's plan was supposed to be. So I mean, The Simpsons is not correct about portraying Christianity as something that was, something that, in an ideal situation, that, you've got something that's like Mormonism, where people are approving of polygamy, where it's just like, well, I guess this is normal and we've got to, live with this, because it really never was. And if there's something that has made that more evident, like recently, it's kind of the bumper sticker movement that was really not something that was started by the Christians. That wasn't like something that was, on their agenda until it was kind of pushed by the other side, of the one man, one woman thing. That was kind of more in response to something that was like proactively just being like, hey, we're just doing this randomly because it happens to be on our general agenda. I'm going to slow this down so I can concentrate more on what I'm talking about rather than this game. So yeah, in some ways, it's really, at least from a polygamy standpoint, that's not something that you could say is identifiable as a thing that the Christians are proponents of. Mormons aren't really Christians. They're very much more like a cult, because with that you do have a central leader. You've got that component of the central leader just happening to have these commandments from God about like having concubines and multiple wives. There's a lot of suicide cults connected to whenever you're talking about occultism. You've got some kind of defined message from outer space or from God, telling you that the leader wants you to give your money and your life, like literally, like take your life, in order to, comply with the tenet, the commandments of the religion. There's a lot of apocalyptic, or, well, I don't think there's a lot of, but there's very high profile ones at least, with regard to cults. But, back to what Christianity proposes, there's some people like Gary North who, please, for goodness sake, don't listen to this guy, because he's so destructive in so many of his, actually, Gary North is probably the reason why I'm having a lot of struggles with my life right now. Or I don't think it's really him so much as that he's just repeating what's written in the scriptures. There's some parts, there's some people, I haven't really researched it enough, and it's not really something that I'm interested in, but they kind of make an allowance for fornication when it comes to prostitution. There's like some verse in Deuteronomy that's talking about, like, as long as you're paying the prostitute, like it's okay. and like all these bajillions of clauses about like, you know, sexual sin and stuff for some reason don't apply in that situation, because like in marriage and stuff, you know, it's like, yeah, those are still in place, but you know, this is an exception to the rule and you're allowed to do this. And I don't think it even applies to women. Like, I think it's just like the only ones that are permitted like this activity are like female prostitutes and like the males who would be hiring them, you know, as long as they're not married, etc., etc., which is really weird. But I don't think that counts as like a cult thing, you know, because that's not really something that's limited to the leader of the cult or leaders, you know, like Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, like they're the one, and then the elders, like in that gangster clique that were allowed to have like multiple wives and stuff. But yeah, I don't think that meets qualification for a cult. But what does match, I think, is this kind of more centrally managed way of parents deciding who their kids can marry. And you see this even in secular groups. I mean, I think there's a lot of circles in America, at least, where it's for some reason looked at as a good thing to be really harsh with your children. You know, especially if you're talking about a daughter and deciding who she is and isn't allowed to date, and really having the parents, or especially the father, be the one to make those decisions. And it's really a weird thing too, because it's like, are you really trying to protect your daughter, or is there something else going on here, where you kind of want to keep your daughter to yourself? I mean, I'm not talking about like an incestual thing. It's just kind of like, it's like, what kind of connection is there that you're trying to keep? What did I just do? Was that speed? I just speed it up. What did I just? That was pause. I mean, is it more of an emotional connection that you're talking about here? But you know, regardless, it's still, you've got either the father or, you know, whatever male leader is in the house, and I, you know, don't have enough information as to whether this applies to more unconventional situations where you got like a single parent, or, you know, homosexual marriage or something, because, you know, I think in that situation, just inherently, there's probably going to be more. Whoa, why are there two of them? You know, they're just by the nature of that relationship, they're, you know, I'd expect them to be more lenient, and that might change in the future too. You know, because maybe you've got a single parent or homosexual couple who are trying to emulate what they see in the in the precedent of you know, currently married couples. And I hope this isn't something that's gonna, you know, as time goes on, like, extend to those people, you know, where you've got somebody being really harsh with their children because they see everybody else doing it. and they're like, well, okay, this is what's normal, I guess we got to do it too. But I think it's, what I'm trying to say is it's way more exaggerated in Christian circles, or especially when you're talking about the Bible, where, you know, they've got either tradition from, you know, thousands and thousands of years of culture that's been, you know, certain practices have been going on, or, you know, it's something that's specifically delineated in the scriptures of things that you're supposed to do. There's a thing called a dowry, and that's something that, I mean, is still carried out in parts of the world. I think India's got something like that. You know, and is in England at least was, you know, still going on in the days of I think Jane Austen. I think by the time Charles Dickens rolled around, they'd already stopped that practice. But, you know, a dowry is kind of something that involves buying and selling a wife. And, you know, a lot of times when you're talking about Abrahamic transactions involving, you know, the sale of daughters, or, you know, tasks that the son or the husband, prospective fiance, would have to carry out in order to buy out his wife. You know, you're talking about what's his face, who had to work for 7 years for one wife, and then when it turned out to be her sister, he had to go back and work as a slave for another 7 years. I mean, that's stuff that, as far as I know, when you're talking about the groups that are practicing you know, Old Testament law still, they've still got that in place, where, you know, you're buying and selling women, and in India you've still got arranged marriages. I think in Japan it used to be that way. It's probably that way still in parts of China. In Africa, it's like, okay, this isn't something that's uncommon, this is something that's ancient, and it's not something that's you could really say is something that's divorced from tradition, and really has anything. I mean, I'm sure there's still proponents of it. There's still proponents of it in Christian circles. But I think in Christian circles, at least, it's kind of like an Italian mafia, where, or mob boss kind of a thing, where you have these kind of horse trading deals going on, except it's human trafficking pretty much. Where you're talking about certain people having to, you know, being used as collateral, you know, with certain deals going on between people, in just an excruciatingly long period of time. Okay, I realize that there's people who date for, like, really unreasonable amounts of time before, you know, deciding that they want to stay for each other for life, or, you know, barring divorce. But that said, the, you know, pre-marital thing is just insane. It's like I mean, you're talking about like decades long things, like maybe even before the children are born. Deciding on, who's going to get what out of this deal. And they aren't really treated like they've got any choice in the matter. And I think that kind of thing is, I mean, it didn't stop with the New Testament. When you talk about Pentecostals, they're very much still big proponents of Old Testament law. Okay, I've got to get ready to do this. Oh, I did it too soon. No, still too soon. Oops. There we go. Alright, so I found out that the way to do this is to wait until it's totally open. Like, and you can see two squares on either side. So now I can do it. Actually, that might be too soon. Or not soon enough. No. Okay. Nope, still not soon enough. Yeah. Oh, that's right. I still got it on 6%. I'm going back to the keyboard. I know it's noisier, but it's easier to use than a controller. So yeah, I was talking about arranged marriages in the Old Testament and New Testament. You know, there's still that crowd who wants to control what, you know, who people are marrying, you know, especially with their daughters. You know, and I understand what the, you know, what the thinking behind that is supposed to be. Or what they keep saying it is, but, you know, might not be actually, you know, where they're not being honest about what it's about, and how it's about trying to control what it is that somebody does, and, you know, just trying to, okay, I've got this person, I'm trying to, you know, I've controlled this person's life up to this point, and, you know, they put it as, well, I'm trying to protect that person, and I'm, you know, I think some people are, but I think that the people that are really interested in protecting their children would more be interested in, you know, allowing, you know, their sons and daughters to make their own decision with who they're marrying. You know, and you can point to different studies and stuff that show that, okay, well, arranged marriages you know, result in happier marriages long term and stuff, but I think that, you know, in those cases, that's more of a situation where you've got an organization that's trying to, it's already decided what it is that they want to do, and they're coming up for reasons using the people that they're arguing against, using those people's method of argument, going like, you know, just and really they don't believe things from that way of arguing. You know, I mean, it's like, okay, well, one person's way of arguing is talking about your emotions, and one person's way of arguing is talking about how you feel. But the person who's, you know, arguing their emotions or their dogma, you know, science can be a dogma too, but you know, the one person that's really arguing their dogma is just using those methods to advance their own agenda. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't really matter what those things say, but that person's still going to believe that, you know, because they're getting something else from this that they're not getting from that science or something. You know, they're too heavily invested in it. You know, when they really, the worst thing for them would not be to lose the argument. The worst thing for them would be for them to not get their way, or, you know, to have their child who's, you know, worst case scenario is that the child chooses something that's counter to what the parent wants them to do, or that's counter to those parents' wishes. And, you know, some of the things are more financially self-serving towards the parent, or in terms of control are self-serving to the parent. You've got these things where you've got people like Michael Pearl or Stephen Maxwell, who are pro, you know, their actions end up being pro-government. Like they'll train their children to comply with, you know, different governmental coding regulations, or something regarding like architecture or something like that. And I'm kind of using those people as an example, and trying to specifically single them out, although they can be singled out because they're disproportionately influential in the Christian community, because they are the most extreme. I mean, I have no problem comparing them to ISIS, because it's like ISIS does the extreme things that they do, because, you know, it's kind of like a gang, where each one is trying to appear to be the most brutal, because when criminals are joining, they will pick out the most violent people to join, and I don't really know why that's the case. I mean, I'm thinking that maybe it's because, you know, whoever is the most violent is the ones who are the most feared, and I mean, this is the thing that goes back to the Old Testament, where, you know, you've got, you know, the oldest contracts, like the Abrahamic covenant, are partly based on, you know, the way that God sealed the deal in the Old Testament was, you know, an animal sacrifice, which was used to show what would happen if you broke the covenant. You would cut the animal in half longitudinally, and have a boiling pot carried between those two pieces, which I guess would mean that you'd be cut in half and then boiled, or boiled and then cut in half. You know, so it's like, okay, you're going to either comply or you're going to be executed in the most painful way possible. And that wasn't something that like was started with the Old Testament. You know, that's something that was kind of in vogue in the culture that Abraham was living in. Can I even get this? You know, so whenever you're talking about a primitive culture, well, actually, I mean, it's I'm kind of setting violence up as something that is inherently primitive. Like, you could say, well, you see brutality in modern culture, but I don't think that it's modern to be brutal. You know, there's other ways of dealing with things like financial manipulation extortion and, you know, kind of shylocking and all kinds of, you know, gangster types of extortion and secret keeping and, you know, just creepy, dirty stuff, ways of controlling other people. You know, so you've got gangsters who are primitive and violent, and I mean, just you've got to listen to some of the stuff that Michael Pearl says. But I mean, don't take it to heart. I mean, just listen to it in order to understand, you know, what a psychopathic, sick, just totalitarian, authoritarian, domineering, I mean, just self-centered, self-serving thing with this veneer of we're doing this to look out for people, or, you know, obeying the law equals morality. You know, like Stephen Maxwell does with his kids, like, well, here's how you get along with the law, and here's what the regulations are, and here's how you comply with it. Well, we did this, and they came around and said we did a great job, and, you know, everything conformed to their things, and it was like, this is the best compliance we've seen. You know, so they're training their children at a young age to be compliant, and submissive, and to, you know, sit up and beg, pretty much, when they're supposed to, and, you know, then to defend, you know, defend government when it, you know, like it's the most moral institution, you know, and you've got people like Doug Phillips, who's kind of exiled but still has a great deal of power, I think, you know, because of his like adultery, you know, and that met with a negative response, but I mean, I don't think he's totally without power now. You know, and just the ways that, you know, they keep control over people. It's, I mean, I'm not trying to say this is like a conspiracy. It's more like you've got people who hold the same values, and they're, you know, in a small regional, you know, physical location. You know, you've got a very tight-knit group where they're all supporting each other, and, you know, you've got things biased in favor of that group of people. It's either built by that same group of people, or is very much in line, you know, it's almost one-to-one in line with what the Christian agenda is. You know, when you're talking about authoritarianism, it's really close with the Christian agenda of, well, we're preparing the kingdom, you know, for the Lord, and part of that means establishing a government that's as close to compliance with Old Testament regulations as possible. So trying to draw that back into marriage. You know, you're talking about in Mormon circles where you've got a lot more control than other parts of the country over marriage, and who you're marrying. think it's probably that way with the Amish too. Much more clean looking cult, but you know, you still got people that are kind of operating on their own rules, or you know, are being protected by the local government. You know, in terms of behaviors that in other situations would be, or in other locations would be illegal, or at least stuff that would result in a lot more lawsuits, or lawsuits decided in favor of the different group. You know, it's like, okay, if I ever got into trouble with Gary, my stepfather, no matter what it is that he did, because you've got this, the group in power is a bunch of 50-year-old white guys, you know, a good old boy network, they're going to be like, you know, sympathetic towards what Gary has said, you know, and any judgments would be by default decided, you know, in favor of Gary against me. You know, that's the kind of environment that I'm living in. You know, I mean, I can't, there's some things that I want to do but I can't do. Like I think that if I try to get into like an estate hearing or something regarding Josh's leftover possessions, and trying to get a hold of this laptop, you know, through legal means, you know, that Gary's been keeping hostage, I think it would be decided against me just because, you know, you've got somebody who's a peer of the judge and of that same social class, of somebody who's making more money, somebody who's got a higher level work position, somebody who works in the same area, and somebody who's got the same political leanings as the judge might. So, you know, you got these people who are pals, and, you know, they're part of a support network which scratches each other's backs in case, you know, any of the others get into trouble. And, you know, even his job, like, you know, is something that would go along with the agenda of the judge, because it would be something that's, you know, locally approved of and looked at as, you know, a point of pride and stuff. You know, and even just talking about it is something that's risky for me. You know, it's like I could get into a libel suit about it, and I'd lose it because, you know, everything is this local, you know, clique of things that are going on. So I mean, that's kind of what the atmosphere I'm living in is like in terms of the local culture. I mean, it's bad. It's not, Okay, in Rosemary's Baby, you've got this group of pretty much criminals who are doing criminal behavior, and they're all getting away with it because they're all covering for each other. And I think what Roman Polanski was trying to do was he was trying to point out that this is the way it is with the church. And he's saying, well, if Satanists did this, you wouldn't like it, and you would say that this is bad, but you're controlling people's lives on a, you're micromanaging people. You're doing all the same things that these people who are supposed to be your moral polar opposite, and you're calling them evil. So it's like, all right, is this stuff evil or isn't it? And people want to say, well, it's only evil if you're doing it, like if your group is doing it. And it's kind of the way it is with Christianity and with regard to other religions, or I mean, really any practice or anything that's supposed to be a sin. Well, it's only a sin if God says it is. If it's something that appears, like you've got, the obliteration of the Midianites. Well, okay, you've got children listed among that group, people that are supposed to be killed by the forces of Israel. Or actually, I don't know if it was Israel at that time, because they hadn't moved into Jerusalem yet. I think it would be called just as the Hebrews as a people group. This is actually getting really fast. I'm playing this at 75%, but it's still getting fast. I'm going to slow this down because I don't want to stop thinking. So, you've got the anti-abortionists saying, well, killing a child is murder, unless it's the Midianites, in which case it's perfectly fine. Things... the sin itself is really only looked upon as bad or horrific if it's something that I don't think it really is. It's just it's whatever at the time is against the rules that are set forth. And I'm talking about a really long period of time. I mean, rule changes in Christianity don't happen that often. You had the original rules in the Garden of Eden, which probably only lasted like a week, maybe, if we're being optimistic. I think the way that the story is told, it takes place on day 7. Like, Eve is created, she eats the forbidden fruit, Adam eats the forbidden fruit. Then 18 years, well, actually I don't think it was even that. You've got Cain murdering his brother. I mean, who knows, maybe they did when they were 4 years old. Cain goes into exile and then marries his sister. Well, I mean, any other time that would be considered incest. So you had a rule change as soon as the fall of man happened. You had the initial rule change, or the initial set of rules was in the Garden of Eden, just don't eat the stinking fruit. Even though I've created you with the proclivity towards sin, and I'm going to blame this on you. It's like, okay, if you got buggy programming, whose fault is it? The programmer or the code? Well, you created it, right? So that would be your doing, right? Yeah, and then you got God blaming it on us and saying that we need to do something that He's commanded, just because He's commanded it. Because, everything that He does is right at the specific time that He's said it has been right. Like, okay, you gotta increase the human population. Well, we gotta do this somehow. Go ahead and marry your sister. In fact, go ahead and have multiple wives. Actually, I don't know if it even counts in the Old Testament. Because anytime it is mentioned in the Old Testament, like pre-flood era, it's not mentioned positively. And then you had the set of rules that were in between, the fall of man and the flood. And you had another set of rules, once Abraham started out, and then you had another set of rules once, during the brief 3-year period of Christ, like up until the time that He died. And in that 3-day period, you had a set of rules, because there were things that they were supposed to do, like in that 3-day period. And you had another set of rules that was in between the time that Revelation was written and the time that Christ descended. So, there's been a bunch of rule changes, but we're talking about a 3,000-year period of time. So really, those rule changes don't happen that often. What was I talking about? Talking about arranged marriages, but people try to say that there's contradictions. Well, some of those contradictions are because there have been, rule changes. I mean, what iteration of the Dungeons and Dragons rules are we on now? How often do laws change in America? They change really frequently. Sometimes over the course of a year. Sometimes it takes a really long time, like 50 years for something to change. It's just painstakingly slow, and it seems like it's getting faster all the time. Which one can I hit first? Alright, I'm just gonna let these drop and see which one hits first. Alright, so I need to catch the bacon. And I need to change this to my gamepad, because for some reason it crashes when I try to use the keyboard and do this frame advance thing. What frame was that? 67? Why is it not reading? Oh, that's why, because it's got it on the joypad. There's one frame after that thing fully opens up that you have to wait in between when it'll accept that command. Actually, I want to see what they're saying here first. That's Mario Brothers. Are you getting the hang of Game & Watch games? Why don't you try Mario Brothers? Why don't you mind your own business? Move your characters up and down the ladders. Make sure that none of the packages fall off. Yeah, that's what that is. Right, so I got this. Start out empty. No, it's not empty. Already got stuff. Present. Lots of things happening. Looks like a portal to the nether realm. Where's Mario Circus? Alright, this is why I'm like making sure that I go back at the start of the thing and exit it, because I get a note if you don't get the requisite number of points in order to get the next thing. I'm actually going to be going through these really fast. Like later. Wait, I already got this. Why is this circus? It's just... well, it's many little Game & Watches. Gauze? Is that how you pronounce it? Hmm. I'm actually going to play through the first 8 levels of the Link game once it comes out. Really weird right now. Those are his eyes. I should back up, shouldn't I? Here, just hey. Oops. I know I should be finding the exact frame, like when I can open the start menu. But I think I've got it close enough. Like to within 1 frame. See, these are the notes that I have to get every time, but they don't show up unless you get less than 1,000 points. That's... Okay, save my thing.
I want to do